Today, we're taking a look at the Bristol Type 133, a single-seat, all-metal, low-wing monoplane fighter from the mid-1930s, and probably one that many of you haven't heard of. It was one of several unlucky designs that tried to usher in the era of the sleek monoplane fighter for the RAF, a task that was eventually completed by the Hawker Hurricane. And because of the Hurricane's success, this innovative design, like that of the Gloster monoplane fighter that we covered several months ago, is mostly ignored by aviation historians, both amateur and professional. But to understand the history of the Bristol 133, we need to go back to 1930 and its predecessor, the Bristol Type 123. In 1930, the biplane still reigned supreme, with the bulk of the RAF's fighter force being made up of the Armstrong-Whitworth Siskin and the Bristol Bulldog. Though very capable aircraft themselves, the rapid advancements made in aircraft technology, particularly power plant design, meant that their modest top speeds were quickly deemed to be obsolete. The Bulldog could push to around 178 miles an hour on a good day, and the Siskin couldn't even reach 160. Because of this, the Air Ministry issued Specification F7/30, which called for a high-performance day and night interceptor fighter. It required a design that was superior to existing fighters of the day in terms of range, maneuverability, rate of climb, and service ceiling, and it required a top speed of no less than 250 miles an hour. Additionally, the aircraft was to come with a two-way radio, it was to provide excellent all-round visibility for the pilot, it had to have a low wing loading and be able to land at speeds no greater than 50 miles an hour, and it was to be powered by the still experimental steam-cooled variant of the Rolls-Royce Kestrel 4, which would soon be renamed as the Rolls-Royce Goshawk. The Air Ministry appreciated the complexity of their requirement, and when they invited manufacturers to tender submissions in 1931, they set a very generous 3-year deadline for the production of prototypes. Additionally, their invitation came with the promise of substantial production orders for the winning aircraft, and those who had not succeeded would be given the opportunity to submit more adventurous designs as a private venture as well. In essence, it was the opportunity of the decade, one that would spawn several interesting designs, as well as lead to the issuing of follow-up specifications that would lead to the development of the RAF's fighter force that went into the Second World War. Not wishing to be left out, and despite being forced to use a competitor's engine in the design, the Bristol Aeroplane Company submitted their proposal in 1932. In fact, they eventually proposed no less than 4. The main submission was a Goshawk-powered biplane that was designated as the Bristol Type 123. Along with this, the company also submitted 2 low-wing monoplane proposals, the Goshawk-powered Type 127 and the Bristol Mercury-powered Type 128. Finally, the Type 129 was also proposed as an adventurous alternative. In a way, this harkened back to the old pusher fighters of the First World War, except that it was an all-metal aircraft with a potent 4-gun armament mounted in the nose. Surprisingly, none of these designs were accepted for prototyping, but the company was invited to build a revised biplane based on the Type 123 proposal as a private venture. The Bristol design team tidied up the design, streamlined the fixed undercarriage, took the wing slots and controls from their Bristol Bulldog, and also added drooping ailerons to serve as flaps. The updated Type 123 design was submitted to the Air Ministry in March of 1933, and the construction of a prototype was approved shortly thereafter. With its rather aggressive looks, courtesy of the heavily staggered wings, the 123 looked promising, but in reality it was a complete disappointment. It did feature many innovations, including easily removable fuel tanks, lightweight but high-strength wing spars, and the lower wing was a new cantilever design that was produced as a single unit built integral to the fuselage. But it was too complex, and more importantly, it was too small for its own good, being described by one observer as the attempt to fit a quart into a pint pot. Powered by a 695 horsepower Goshawk 3 engine, it flew for the first time in June of 1934. Test flights immediately revealed a litany of stability problems, some stemming from a seemingly undersized rudder, some from ineffective ailerons, and others due to the arrangement of the wing slats. Bristol test pilot Cyril Ewins was not impressed by the aircraft at all, and after changes to the wing slats and rudder dimensions led to no improvement, he declared any further development would be a waste of the company's money. Other manufacturers were having similar problems with their own prototypes, either due to the recalcitrant nature of the Goshawk engine or due to other various problems. At this point, the Air Ministry realised two mistakes had been made. Too much faith had been placed in the Goshawk engine, and too much preference had been given to the more conservative biplane designs. As Bristol had just been awarded a contract to produce the Type 130 bomb bay, Frank Barnwell, the company's chief designer, felt like the time was right to propose a more radical alternative for the ministry's specification. He drew up initial plans for a low-wing monoplane of all-metal construction that was to be powered by a Bristol Mercury radial engine. Upon reviewing the basic design drawings of the aircraft, dubbed the Bristol Type 133, the Air Ministry gave permission for Bristol to produce a prototype as a private venture, which, if reviewed favourably, could be evaluated for a production contract. Completed in the same year that the Hawker Fury and Handley Page Hayford entered service, the prototype Bristol 133 made for a striking contrast. In comparison to the biplanes that dominated British skies, it was sleek and modern, and it was innovative. It was the first Bristol aircraft to make use of stressed metal sheeting rather than doped fabric covering, and it was the first aircraft designed for British military use that made use of a retractable landing gear from the start, rather than having it added on to a design that started with a fixed undercarriage. The low-mounted cantilever wing of the 133 made it instantly recognisable. Built as an inverted gull wing, it gave the 133 a similar profile to that of the Vought F4U Corsair, which would enter service with the United States about a decade later. The wing was split into two sections, and it had a constant chord with rounded tips. The centre section housed the fuel tanks and the undercarriage. The ailerons occupied the full span of the outer wings, and were arranged to droop symmetrically to reduce landing speed. And like the retractable landing gear, these were manually operated by a hydraulic hand pump, meaning that the pilots had quite the workout when coming in for landing. It isn't 100% clear whether the prototype was completed with or without its intended armament, but the design had 4 .303 caliber machine guns. 2 were mounted in the fuselage, synchronized with the propeller, and 2 were installed in the wing slightly outboard of the undercarriage. Powered by a 640 horsepower Bristol Mercury 6S2, the prototype was first flown on the 8th of June 1934 at Filton Airfield. Unlike its predecessor, this first flight was actually very promising, with test pilot Cyril Ewins claiming that with the right modifications, it could be a real winner for the RAF. Following a few more tests at Filton, the 133 went back to the factory for said modifications. The wheel brakes were made more effective, the rudder area was increased, the drooping ailerons were replaced by short-span ailerons and separate split flaps, a sliding canopy was installed, and a new long-chord cowling was also installed. In this new guise, the prototype took to the skies again in the autumn of 1934, and after initial test flights to prove that it was still sound, it went on for an extensive series of evaluations. These ran until March of 1935 without incident, and only a few spinning and dive tests remained before it could go on to Martlesham Heath for RAF acceptance. It was then, on the 8th of March, that the service, and Bristol, was robbed by fate. Another test pilot for Bristol, T.W. Campbell, took the aircraft up for one last handling test. Unfortunately, he forgot that the undercarriage was down when he put the aircraft into a right-hand spin at 14,000 feet. The added drag by the undercarriage caused a premature tip stall, and the prototype entered into a dangerous flat spin. Campbell attempted to correct this, trying to push the nose down and opening up the throttle, but with the nose of the aircraft chasing its own tail like a caffeine-fueled terrier, the centrifugal forces starved the engine of fuel and it died. Having lost over 8,000 feet of altitude, and with no hope of recovery, Campbell attempted to bail out. After a horrifying moment when his foot got caught on the control column, he finally got out with just under 2,000 feet to spare. The prototype, unaided by a silk parachute, continued on its downward descent into oblivion and was written off. Following this incident, there were, supposedly, words exchanged about the decision to build just the one prototype of the 133, as many companies built 2 or even 3 at the time, and the aircraft's loss was both a severe disappointment and a severe setback. With further adjustments, the Bristol 133 could have been a premier fighter in the years leading up to the Second World War. It would have certainly been near obsolete by the time hostilities actually began, but the design would have probably spawned a successor by that point, one that had taken on board the various lessons that were learned with its development. But as it stood, Bristol had to essentially start over from scratch, so it didn't bother. Instead, the company moved on to address new specifications issued by the Air Ministry, and in the future they would do their best to not bet everything on a single airframe. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you of course to the patrons, whose details I can now finally update now that I'm back from my break. Due to a combination of house hunting, a rapidly approaching overseas trip, and various other behind-the-scenes stuff, I can't guarantee a wholly reliable video schedule between now and September-ish, but I will do my best to keep things rolling. A big thank you, of course, to our Wing Commander tier patrons, our highest tier members, and a warm welcome to Alastair White and Kent Harrington, who are the newest members of this special group. And I hope everyone enjoyed the little holiday updates I posted over on Patreon, as well as some of the other behind-the-scenes project work. There is more of that coming in the near future. But for now, thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.